life of Jesus, the writings of Scripture, the voice of the global church, and the teachings of the saints down through church history all say in chorus, fasting is essential and powerful. So, let's cover the basics of fasting. First off, what is fasting exactly? Well, let's start with what it's not. It's not abstinence. I regularly hear people say they are fasting from shopping or social media. All great things to do. But that's not fasting. That's abstinence, which has a long and rich history in the church. It's also not a restricted diet. I regularly hear about a juice fast or the Daniel fast, where you eat a vegan diet for a few weeks. But in the story of Daniel, the word fast is never used. That's not a fast, it's a restricted diet, which also has a long and rich history in the church. Fasting is, at its most basic, not eating food. In a normal fast, you continue to drink water, but there are a few examples in Scripture of a fast from both food and water. How long is a fast? There's no set time. The most common fast is from waking until sundown, but there are examples in Scripture of 2-day fasts, 3-day, 7-day, 21-day, and 40-day fasts. When do you fast? Well, again, because fasting is never once commanded, that's up to you. In both Scripture and in church history, we do see two different types of fasting, fasting as rhythm and as response. Fasting as rhythm, this would be fasting twice a week for most of church history, or fasting on Fridays in the Catholic tradition today. The only example of this in Scripture is in the Old Testament, where Israel is commanded to fast on Yom Kippur. But then you have fasting as response. Most of the examples of fasting in Scripture are in response to a national crisis like an invasion or sin or to grief and loss, what the theologian Scot McKnight calls life's sacred moments. In 1 Samuel 31, when King Saul dies, the entire nation fasts for 7 days. In Jonah 3, when Nineveh is warned of their coming destruction, the king calls for a citywide fast and the city is spared. In Esther 4, when the Hebrew people are threatened with genocide, Queen Esther calls for a 3-day fast and they are saved. My point is, fasting is both a rhythm and a response. Do we fast in community or alone? Well, both. A lot of people misread Jesus' warning in Matthew 6 about fasting. He's not saying that fasting in community is wrong any more than prayer in community is wrong. He's saying that fasting as virtue signaling or performance or to show off your spirituality is wrong. Scripture is full of examples of the people of God fasting together. In fact, in the Old Testament, fasts were often called for or even commanded for the entire community, including children and even animals. Finally, we come to the most important question of all. Why do we fast? There are all sorts of reasons we fast. But to group them into 4 basic categories, we fast, 1, to offer ourselves to Jesus, 2, to grow in holiness, 3, to amplify our prayers, and 4, to stand with the poor. It was not until I was in my mid-20s that I first started to experiment with fasting. I remember, I think I was 24, and I was standing in line at a coffee shop, and we were gearing up to plant a church, and I had this thought come out of the blue into my mind. I should do a 3-day fast before we start. And I would love to tell you that that 3 days was just heaven on earth. The heavens parted, and it was me and Jesus. Honestly, the church plant went very well, but I was just hangry for 3 days. But that started me down the road to fasting on a regular basis. And as I gave myself to this practice, or to be more precise, as I gave myself to Jesus through this practice, I discovered what millions of followers of Jesus outside the West and in church history have long said is true. This is one of the most powerful disciplines for the spiritual life. Now, in all honesty, I kind of look forward to it because through fasting, I experience the Father's promised reward, Jesus himself. So, if you want to offer your body and all that you are to Jesus in love, practice fasting.